and what closed primaries mean to Pennsylvania. And first off, maybe what I should do is define what a closed primary is. A closed primary is a primary that doesn't permit all the voters to vote. And there are only 9 states out of 50 that have closed primary elections. Unfortunately, Pennsylvania is one of them. And it is an issue that doesn't get the attention that it truly deserves, because what it has done is it has blocked out, right now today, 1,100,000 voters, people who are registered as independent, from voting in primary elections. They can vote only in a general election, except in a primary election they can vote for only a referendum question. So, in essence, we have said to 1,100,000 people that the door is shut for you every primary election. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and why that needs to change, particularly because we are one of only 9 states that does this. And you would think it's a no-brainer to really change it, but there have been some attempts in recent years with the General Assembly to do that, and the bills simply have not moved. And maybe we can speculate a little bit as to why that is happening. But I also want to say to you, and I know Becky mentioned my history. Since I was an elected official, I'm very involved in helping veterans. And it has a whole lot to do with my life, being a Vietnam veteran, surviving a war that I probably should not have survived, based on others that I served with that died in Vietnam. So I feel I owe veterans something extra. And so why did I get involved in this issue? I got involved in this issue because some people approached me. David Thornburg, who is the son of the former governor, Dick Thornburg, who heads up a statewide nonprofit organization for good government. In addition, another gentleman by the name of John Denny, I don't know if you've heard that name, but he worked for a very powerful person for a number of years, Elsie Hillman. And all of you know, have heard of Elsie Hillman. Both Dick Thornburg and Elsie Hillman had a tremendous positive impact on Pennsylvania in a number of ways. And I respected both of them very much. Now, I'm a Democrat, but them being Republican means nothing to me, because all I really care about is good government. And what I see in Pennsylvania right now today is a serious deficiency to keep us from having a better government. I'm not saying that the elected officials are not doing their job, Democrat or Republican. I'm simply saying with greater participation, government will have more positive input. And that's basically what Becky said about what the League of Women Voters is. And is one of the reasons why I respect this organization so much. Being an elected official, I went to many meetings over the years at different locations, and the League of Women Voters, going back to their formation in 1920, I think was the year, with women's suffrage being the first issue, they've been right on the mark all along, simply educating voters and citizens. So this is another one of those issues. But getting back to me and why I got involved, volunteering with this organization, and a number of others, really about 20, 30 people involved statewide, the 2 veteran organizations that I'm involved with. And when I found out that independents, the highest demographic of independents is military veterans. And I was stunned by that, to be frank about it, but then I thought back 50 years ago, I went to Vietnam at 18 years old. I came back when I was 20, and I couldn't vote. And why couldn't I vote? Well, back then you had to be 21 years of age to vote. And as a result of that, there was not long after, sometime in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken, that law was changed nationally, so that you didn't have to be 21 to vote, you only had to be 18, which was absolutely correct because we were sending millions of Americans to war at the age of 18, and they come back and they couldn't even vote in an election. So the individuals that created this organization have asked different people to join, and when they asked me and I realized that veterans are the highest concentration, the highest demographic of people who cannot vote in the primary, I said this issue's one for me because I want to change that. And why is it that veterans, probably almost 50% of them in Pennsylvania actually, Pew did a research study 5 years ago. A little old, but it's still good information because these things don't change quickly. And what they found was independents were in the high 40s in terms of veterans, and really a stunning statistic. And I couldn't really think of another demographic except possibly the news media, because anytime a reporter ever interviewed me, I'd say, are you Republican, Democrat, Independent? Almost always it was Independent. And it begs the point of me asking, how many of you are Independents? Just out of curiosity.
I have
Okay.
four military children, and that has a lot to do with
Okay.
it.
Because that number continues to increase. For instance, here in Westmoreland County, over the last 20 years, that number has increased about 35%. There are other counties in Pennsylvania where it has increased 50, 75, 90% independence. And it really is a stunning movement of people going from a party, Republican or Democrat, to independent. And they're doing it for a reason, and all of us could suspect the reason. The reasons are that the parties really have become farther apart, so to speak, without getting involved into any issues. So the reason why I'm here today, and one of the reasons why I want to see this legislation passed, and it's going to take a real concerted effort by groups of people like yourself to convince elected officials that it's the right thing to do. Some of you may differ with me, I understand that. But at the same time, I think as people become more educated about the issue, they will support the issue. Because I have not found any practical reason for a person to only be permitted to vote 50% of the time. And that's precisely the message legislatively that we're sending to independents across Pennsylvania. The other fact is that we are only one of 9 states, and I have to say that and reinforce that because it really, to some degree, is embarrassing that we as a Commonwealth, one of the original 13 colonies, and where the Constitution was drafted, debated, and approved, we do not have open primaries. Hard to believe. And so with a concerted effort of all of you and many others doing the same thing across the Commonwealth, I think we can make it happen. As a matter of fact, the information you're getting, there is a bill, Senate Bill 400. But I wanted to make a couple points related to the issue of veterans. It is, veterans vote at a higher percent than the general public. Not significantly higher, but a poll was done and found out that veterans will vote 75% of the time, and the general population 66% of the time. And that I found to be an interesting piece of information, but it doesn't surprise me. Because if someone were to ask me, and I once had a person interviewing me, and they said, "You're a Democrat, you're a liberal Democrat." And I said, "Number one, I'm not liberal. You know, I'm a moderate Democrat. But I'm an American, first and foremost." And I truly believe that's how the majority of veterans feel, and I believe it's how the general public feels. And we are not labeled by a party or in any other situations in life. We are who we are, and I believe our country is very proud of who we are. So that is really one of the reasons why I think veterans choose to be independents. And that I think actually is very practical in terms of who they are. Most elections, this is another stunning statistic, most elections in Pennsylvania in the year 2020 for House and Senate districts and congressional districts, 80 to 90% of them, 80 to 90%, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, somewhere in that category, were determined in the primary election. Hard to believe. Even me being an elected official, that stunned me. And why is that? Well, it's because, obviously, when you look at the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you have rural areas, you have urban areas, and then you have suburban areas. You can pretty much predict in an urban setting that a Democrat's going to be elected. Therefore, the election is determined during the primary. The same when you get into rural areas, farming areas. You can pretty much predict that Republicans are going to be elected. Then when you get into the suburban areas, there's a give and take going both ways. But it's another fascinating item, and it's probably one of the reasons why Pennsylvania is called a swing state. But let's face it, that maybe that's not the way it should be, particularly because independents cannot vote in a primary. And that's really what we're trying to do. We're trying to change and make the process more open, the same thing that the League of Women Voters has been doing since its inception. So there's no doubt in my mind that opening up the primaries is the right thing to do in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. To keep it, to just reinforce what I just said, 90% of the time, these elections are determined in the primary. And even me being an elected official for 30 years, that surprised me. It truly surprised me. And it's something that shouldn't be if, in fact, you don't have 1,100,000 people voting. And that's precisely what is reality in Pennsylvania today. So we need to repeal closed primaries and in the process prove that our election system is much more fair than it is today. Another very genuine reason is, okay, you're an independent. You're one of the 1,100,000. You pay taxes. And tax monies are spent both by county government and by state government in the election process. You are paying your taxes, you're taxes are being used for a purpose, but when you go to vote, you can't vote. So for fiscal reasons alone, another justification to be able to vote in the primary election if you're registered as an independent. It's every piece of information that I've looked at here supports opening up primary elections. Even the point of more and more people moving to become independents. Again, it's gradual, but it's very obvious, which again means that there's probably less people voting as a result of it. Closed primaries, there's no more frank way I can say it, but closed primaries are un-American. How can you say to an individual who has registered to vote, pays their taxes, has served their country, and then they go to vote on a primary election and they're told they can't vote? That is as un-American as anything I've ever heard, and is the reason why we have to change this law. What you have is a bill, Senate Bill 400. I don't know if it'll be 400 during this legislative session, but keep in mind there's a new governor, there's new House members, there's new senators, and there's a great opportunity to change a process that is stale and outdated, to change a process that 1,100,000 people want to see be changed. And so that's the reason why we're trying to get the word out on this issue. There's nothing bad about this. And if there is, I wish someone would tell me what it is. To make elections more fair, and as we all know, many elections, I would just back up and say this. All the controversy that we've heard in the last 3, 4, 5 years about accurately counting election votes, about coercing people when they're going to the polls, absentee ballots, people working at the polls influencing others. There is no greater inequity that I have found more than independents not being able to vote in a primary. You could take all those other issues and accumulatively put them together, and they don't match the 1.1 million voters in Pennsylvania who can't vote in primary elections. So that's why we're all here tonight, to hopefully let people know, let elected officials know, let your neighbors know, let your family know. There's a serious inequity within the election process in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it's time that we change it. I'd like to open it up to questions. Yes?
Have there been other states who have turned this rule around? In other words, I don't know where we started. We have 9 states now that do this. Are some states changing to open primaries, or are these 9 states hard and fast for the last 100 or 200 years, or whatever?
We have been in this position, if I'm not mistaken, since 1937.
9 states.
No, Pennsylvania.
Right, but...
And now, I don't have enough information
okay.
on the other states, but there are still 9 that are considered in the dark ages, and we are one of them. Now, the other 41, there's different variations on how they've changed, and is one of the reasons why you see the list of items that we're requesting be done within the legislation. Yes, Sam?
You see, and from working on this, you see that there's kind of like headwinds getting this passed, since I can project that there's a lot of people who are on one party or the other just to vote in primaries. And if that was open, maybe the parties would lose more members.
Right.
I don't know if the other states that have changed it, there has not been significant loss or gain with the parties. Gradually over time, yes, they see some changes, but there's no, hey, I'm a Republican and independents can now vote in primaries. I'm going to become an independent. I think people think longer and harder about who they are and how they want to represent themselves in the voting process. So yes, I think you would see some gradual changes, but in my estimation, I think the bigger change would be that there would be a strong group of people voting in a primary election, either for Democrats or Republicans or the Green Party or whatever party. And therefore, that group has to be addressed in terms of elected officials and the issues. And generally speaking, this is just my own observation, I have nothing to back this up. Generally speaking, I would think of independents more as a moderate person in their thinking. And I say that about all kinds of issues, which is really something that I firmly believe that we desperately need in America today at various levels, is more people who want to communicate with others that are elected official and somehow meet middle ground on many serious issues. So I think the independents voting in Pennsylvania will help our Commonwealth go in the right direction on a multitude of issues.
What are the nuts and bolts of how this gets done? Is it something that is with a House bill and is simply voted upon, or is it something that then could be a referendum question for primary? What do the
It's
What's it look
like any piece of legislation, of which there are hundreds, sometimes thousands in a session. This is a bill that is put forth either out of the House of Representatives or the Senate, and is put on the floor, could be amended on the floor, but ultimately passes one of the two chambers and then goes to the other chamber.
Is this in discussion right now at all with either side that you're aware of, or?
It's too fresh in the new
Okay.
legislative session.
Okay.
But the goal of the group, Ballot PA, is to get this voted within this legislative session, which goes from January of this year of 2023 to December of 2024. Yes?
Which Senate committee would handle this?
Good question. There is a committee that, I don't know if it's just a state government committee. I should know that answer, forgive me. Having been a state senator.
Would it have the same name in the House? Or do committees have
Oh,
different
no,
names
they
in the
have
House?
similar committees between
Okay.
the two chambers. There may be one or two different ones, but I'll get that information to you. I'll get it to Becky.
I believe this is being discussed in the Senate. Chris Dush is a senator from up towards Jefferson County that happens to be in the PA Senate. And I know Eric Nelson's our local area, but Chris Dush recently brought this up to me. We were at a function, not in this area.
Okay.
And he sounded as though there's a group of them, I call it them, that are discussing this. This is a fresh topic, so it sounds like, because that was one of the things he.
There have been several public hearings in the last couple of years, and that's a good thing. I think the leaders of the House and the Senate need to believe and endorse the legislation. And I would suspect, I don't know the philosophy of this governor, but the previous governor, I know, would have approved this, Governor Wolf. And I would think any governor would be open-minded to that. Yes?
Do you know, in the last legislative session that this was brought up in, did it have bipartisan support?
I attended one public hearing, and it was it was bipartisan in terms of the people that were part of that committee, as are all committees. And it seemed to me as if the majority of people at that hearing supported the issue. Now, why it never moved, I'm not sure.
Because a lot of bills don't move
Yeah.
through the Pennsylvania legislature.
Right. But I don't know the particulars on that one. I don't know if an individual simply didn't want to support it. I can tell you this, Ballot PA is a good group of people that come from various directions in Pennsylvania, and some business people, some labor people, and they've even hired some lobbyists, some very good lobbyists, to hopefully help carry this forward. So the committee PA ballot is learning as we move forward also. Yes.
I wondered how it would work. I noticed here it said they wouldn't get to vote in both, you know, Dem and Republican, but how would it work that when you're an independent, how do you have to pick one, or how do you do that?
When you say independent, what, elected official independent or someone voting?
Someone voting.
Okay, someone voting, obviously they can't vote now. If this changes based on how it's written to be changed, you would go to the poll and identify yourself as either a Democrat or a Republican, only for that singular day. And you would have to vote all Democrat or all Republican. You can't jump back and forth. Okay.
So in small places, it would still be important that candidates cross file.
The candidate that cross files,
Yeah, in order to, for voters to be able to.
That can only happen in three kinds of races:
Right.
school board, county, the Court of Common Pleas, and magistrates. Nobody else is allowed to cross file.
thank you.
Mayor? Or
No.
mayors?
No,
Nope.
that's why the mayor.
There are only three offices in the Commonwealth in which school board.
You're right, judicial.
As a former school board member, I know this.
Thank you.
No problem.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yes.
What was the rationale for a closed primary?
As I look back at some of the statistical data they gave me, if you go back farther in time, there's less and less independence. And as time has gone on, the last 20 years again, there's been significant changes in that. So why the rationale as an independent? I think, I'm giving you my personal opinion of what happened to me. I didn't come out of the military thinking I was going to run for office or whatever. But I did think for a moment about becoming an independent. I didn't do that. I actually initially enrolled as a Republican, and over time I changed to a Democrat. But I think people coming out of the military, again, don't want to take a side. Because if you're in the military, you're a team of people. And they want the country to work well because they've served their country. Consequently, they're hesitant to go to Republican or Democrat and choose independent. I don't know if I'm giving you a good answer there, but and then others in other positions. For instance, if you're in the media, you never know, they may recommend whoever you're employed by to not take a side, so to speak, personally on issues. So it's a natural to become an independent. But I really think today, with what we witness in terms of the division in government, I mean, just look at Congress, beginning of the year. I think the division in government has caused more people to become independent. I don't know, is that everyone else's opinion? At least that's mine, yeah.
Well, you mentioned in 1937, that was the beginning. Prior to that, Pennsylvania didn't have primaries. In fact, there were no primaries in the United States till 1912. Oregon was the first state. I teach comparative political science, by the way.
Good, come on up here.
Initially, they replaced conventions, right? So each party would have its own convention and choose its candidates, even down to the local level. You'd have a county convention or even a municipal convention and decide who was running for school board, who was running for mayor and city council. Not every party participates in primaries. Under the Libertarian Party just had their convention, I think in Lancaster or York, like a week and a half ago. They do their nomination completely internally, and most parties did that historically. Only really after World War II or just before it did you start to see primaries emerge. John F. Kennedy only ran in 5 primaries in 1960. The expectation, all you gotta do is show that you can win in some, get to the convention, and then it would be decided there. And I think that worked in the era in which party identification was really high, and we viewed primaries really as, intra-party decision-making, basically, right? Parties are deciding who their candidates are. I'm a party official as well, so I'm always kind of like, yeah, we should make the decisions. But, the increasing number of independents is also related to precisely to kind of the hyper-partisan, polarized kind of system we're in, which does lead to different results than you would have gotten 40 or 50 years ago.
And counties with greater movement towards independent also have greater diversity. Hispanics, African Americans, etc. Now, if that's a direct
not
correlation,
Westmoreland,
I'm not sure. But that's what the stats are saying.
Do you see younger voters tending towards independent party affiliate?
I'm a professor at Pitt Greensburg, so I advise, and I'm a political science professor, so I see a lot of them. It depends on their parents. In the first few years of their voting, they tend to follow parental lines. There's usually, once they're in college, just past college, then you have some defection, if you will, from the family line. But political science scholarship is mostly shown that family commitment and identification is super strong, about 85% of the time, well into even middle age, it sticks.
Well, that's interesting because we do a lot of voter registration, especially young people in colleges and trying to branch out into high schools. And we do get a number of questions. It's like, well, can I register independent? It's like, you can, but you won't be able to vote in primary. I think it deters a lot of people from registering as an independent.
Definitely.
And we had talked about like the different kind of primaries. There are open primaries where you declare that day. They're also called blanket, also what are sometimes jokingly called free love primaries, where you can vote across the ballot. You can vote in the gubernatorial race, you can vote for a Democrat. In the Senate race, you can vote for a Republican. There's only a couple of states that really do that, but that does exist out there.
I've been told that in Pennsylvania, where you see significant increases, what's pushing that are the younger voters. I don't know to what degree, but it appears as if younger voters are choosing independent more so than older voters.
And I think, just from my experience, I think if they had the full range, the ability to vote in primaries and general elections, I think we'd see a lot more new voters register as independent.
Mm-hmm.
So from from what you've said, that the majority of candidates are selected in the primary, and they go on to win the general election in a not competitive way. So the independents, you know, we say it's not fair, they're not allowed to vote in the primary. But they also don't have representation. The representatives are not beholden to them as voters, because they're not their constituency. They're not the group of people that elected them. So their voice in government, I think, is greatly diminished
If you're independent.
if you're an independent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're right,
So,
and especially under the present system.
Right.
yeah.
But we really believe that we're in the dark ages with our
Right,
present
so,
system.
I mean, I'm just saying, they don't have representation.
Right.
It's-
Yeah, well, they don't, but they should.
Yeah, they should,
And
yeah,
that's
yeah.
really one of the problems with our country today, is that you really represent all the people when you're elected. And,
Supposedly.
pardon me?
Supposedly.
Well, supposedly, but it's factual. And good government can only exist if you have cooperation within the government. And, I mean, I've seen that firsthand at multiple levels of government. And that's a good thing. Competitiveness in America is a good thing than almost anything. And why not in elections also? And we're taking some of that competitiveness of the election process out of it, and where we should be doing the opposite.
So what would you have us do tomorrow? Who would you have us call?
I would just, I'd spread the word that open primaries is better government. I'm not gonna say it's all of a sudden overnight good government. We hope our government is good government all the time. But I think it's another element that the average citizen doesn't see that would be a positive contribution to the process. And I don't think you're gonna see a change. If they change that this year and next year we have open primaries, is state government not gonna have any battles and differences? No. But I really think there's another element of positive input added to the process.
And if we were to call, so there's a bill in the Senate, we could call our senator or state senator and ask them to co-sponsor that bill?
Yes.
And Eric Nelson's a Marine. And so with the fact that you're telling us that's the stats for statistics, I would think, and I know that the other senator I mentioned, Chris Dush, is the Air Force.
Right.
I think if we hit some of these people that are the military and understand that they're representing their family, because I can tell you, they're senators, if they were Marine, they're
Yeah.
tight with the,
It's a good script
I think,
for that call,
Everyone has a House member, everyone has a senator.
yeah,
I'd let them know your opinion.
yeah.
There is some evidence, and this would point to some of those younger voters and many other people pick independent, is that they also pick independent because while the system's dominated by, excuse me, two political parties, there's some evidence that Americans are becoming a lot more ideologically fragmented. But the system's so locked into two parties, the way we elect, that it drives people into being independent. So there's also some evidence that independents aren't that independent. There's been a lot of sociological and political evidence that about 80% of the time independents are vote one way or the other on parties and issues pretty consistently. But it does show that there's some unhappiness, and I think it's why some people look at things like ranked choice voting or other options to try to open up space for other kinds of candidates, and whether that helps bring in more moderate candidates is one of the options there available. But I think it's part of the same kind of narrative kind of issue, in that an ever polarizing and more partisan both electorate and government, there's some people left out of that.
Well, the last thing it would cause is polarizing. And again, if you're paying taxes, if you're serving your country, if you're proud to be an American, you should be voting. And if you register, you should not be excluded 50% of the time. So that's the strongest message
Yep.
here. You know, no matter who you are, no matter what you register, you should be able to vote both times. That's simple.
Yep.
If not, there's something seriously wrong, and there is in
And
Pennsylvania.
there is. So any other questions or comments?
If you have any ideas or anything, I'm
I'm just
always
curious.
available.
Do you know what the other 8 states are?
I don't.
Okay, I'm just curious.
I
Who
do
these
know this
outliers
though,
are.
they're spread out.
Okay.
It's not a northeast, west, or whatever.
That's kind of what I was wondering.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna go online and look at that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please,
Yes,
please,
well,
let me know. Well, I
Okay.
appreciate it very much, and
Very, very good.
if anyone ever wants to reach me, 412-352-1111, easy number. If you have any thoughts or any ideas, I have 3 different emails. Jack@PittsburghHiresVeterans.org is probably the best one.
I just want to say that it's an honor to meet you, sir, and I've heard your name my whole life, being in southwestern Pennsylvania. And thank you for your service to this country and to our grand state. And
Yeah, thank you.
thank you for being here.
Thank you all for doing what you're doing, very much.
Well, thank you.
All
And
right.
thank you all the time. Thank you.